Yeah. So, basically,
Okay, so as I'm sure
a bunch of other stuff.
anybody watching this will have been aware, because the news broke like last week. Robin Williams passed away, and
he died.
apparently suicide. Well, not apparently; it was definitely suicide. Which
It's messed up.
It's one of those things. It's kind of like, at least I felt the same way as when Michael Jackson died. It was actually the same circumstance. I just happened to be online reading the news when the news broke, and so like the first news blips show up, and you click on them, and the links are already crashed because like so many people are going nuts, and that's when you think, oh, I bet there's something to this because it broke the internet, which tells you like how big a story that was. But yeah, for people in our generation, you know, this is a real sucker punch. I mean, how did you feel when you found it?
Oh, well, I wasn't initially sure that it was a suicide because the way some of the news media was covering it, like they were sensationalizing the whole, you know, like the death thing. They were sort of making it sound like, oh, this. You know, this person must have had a drug problem, or this person must have had, like, you know, those poor celebrities that just, like, you know, just couldn't handle it. Ooh, it's like as if somehow having a mental problem or mental illness in their view was like, oh, they can just get up by their bootstraps and just ignore their mental illness.
And that's the thing for people who don't. I mean, I don't suffer from depression, but I'm very well aware that it's a real thing. And for people who
they were
don't,
acting like it wasn't.
Yeah, it's like, oh, boy, he was a celebrity. He was super rich and successful. And I'm like, how many super rich, successful people are still miserable? Clearly, it doesn't buy you happiness. That has to come from inside.
Ew, and since we're not super rich or successful in that
but
regard,
we're also not depressed. So what is that?
Exactly. Yeah, self-esteem and self-worth were not one of my problems. I was clearly, if anything, narcissism and vanity might be
actually,
one of the things.
One of my absolute favorite anecdotes that I remember you telling me, because I was going on about, like, you know, you have those bad dreams, like, you know, when you're a kid and you go to school and you're naked and everybody's laughing, and you kind of looked at me and went, you know, I have dreams where I come to school naked, but in my dreams,
I don't care.
It's a good thing. It's just like,
like, why not? I'm in a dream and I'm naked. It's
just like, own it. Just like, yeah, here we go. So yeah, no, we don't particularly suffer from depression, especially you.
Oh shit!
But
yeah, but it was like the premise of the. And Robin Williams' later movies, he did a lot of depressing, sulky movies anyways. You probably knew he was kind of manic anyway.
Well, and that's the thing.
I figured Bill Murray'd be the next one. No, it was Robin Williams.
It's one of the cliches, but I think also a truism of the comedy world is that a lot of famous comedians, the really, you know, successful ones, also tend to be really messed up. And in fact, that's probably where a lot of the comedy comes from. It's a sort of shield that you learn to project outwards as a way of like controlling your interaction with the world. You sort of become like a clown or a you know,
like this little guy
comedian. Yeah, except I don't think he has a self-esteem problem either. Whoa, hey.
Meow. Yeah, kitty cat. All right.
Yeah, he was not a happy camper just then, but But yeah,
sometime.
It's and you know, a lot of comedians would be the first to tell you, like, you know, yeah, my comedy comes from pain.
What is that quote from? Most comedy comes from not pain. I don't know if something like that. There's a famous quote from. There is some famous quote that's like that. You're
well, a lot of them.
From
I'm paraphrasing. Like a whole bunch of comedians have basically said that.
Comedy comes from pain. Probably Eddie Murphy or something like that.
Any number, because I mean, you look at how many famous comedians struggle with, you know, addiction and depression. And so when they announced that Robin Williams had killed himself, it was a shock, but I can't say as it was entirely a surprise. It was...
I expected it to be one of the other ones that was more depressed, but no, it was him.
No, well, he was, I mean, he really was depressed. I mean,
apparently,
that's why he was doing mountains of drugs.
It turns out that he was sobering, though, but he he was also taking medication for Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, which he hadn't announced to the public at the time that he had.
Which some comedians have come back and said, maybe they said that medication was probably making him more depressed.
Yeah, it was Rob Schneider went on this weird Twitter rant where he's like, "That's what killed him. That's why it happened. He died because of the drugs. The pharmaceutical killed him." And
like Michael Jackson.
And I'm thinking, this is a guy who talked about suicide and depression for years. I don't think that,
I don't think that's what did it.
Parkinson's might not have helped. I don't
No.
know, but I'm not going to speculate as to his medical condition.
Unlike the Fox people who were like, oh,
yeah, and that's the thing. We all want to assign like some reason or like why did it happen.
It was a conspiracy.
And the sad truth of the matter is that sometimes people just can't outrun their demons.
But hopefully, when he died, he had a clown nose. I mean,
Yeah. Patch Adams reference, and that would. And that was the thing though, is like when Williams was doing comedy, he went full bore and did way over the top, like when he wasn't restrained, like when he was ad-libbing in Toys, or some of those movies, he could actually just come on too much. He was just like so, in hyper clown mode that he could be overbearing. But I think when he careened to like the darker and more serious stuff, he went
1 hour
as
photo
full,
of the second half of World According to Garp.
And he would go like as full bore and bombastic in the other direction. It was kind of like he was this.
He was freaking scary in that 1 hour photo movie.
Yeah, it was
nuts.
It was a good role for him. But yeah, Patch Adams to me is kind of an example of like his probably his two most over the top, and some might argue like maudlin and manic at the same time. Like for my taste, that movie spread a little too thick in both directions. Like I'm gonna help the dying children of cancer with my clowning, and it was just like it was so schmaltzy to my taste.
They made fun of in Children's Hospital.
Yeah, it like spawned an entire like TV series spoof just making fun of the premise.
Ew. But Robin Williams just had this natural charisma. It's like I was watching that Live at the Met thing. I found my old videotape of it, copied it, and it was like just for my own use, and it was like it's amazing how many jokes I did when I was a kid. I made up this New Year's comedy special thing based on having seen those. Mm-hmm. Like I had some earlier ones before that because HBO had done the Comedy Hour every New Year's since 1985.
Oh yeah,
and I always thought that the first 2 or 3 were kind of stupid. So I was like, I can do better because I'm awesome. And it was like 1984 or whatever, 85. And so I would do these New Year's comedy skits under the guise of KSCT, phony radio station. K-skit, after KATS. I couldn't use KATS back then because other John Williams, owned KTS at that point. He'd gone up to Washington. And so he had it. Even though we were in junior high, it didn't matter. I could have done it anyway. But in early high school, I was all like, it'll be like the HBO Comedies Hour thing, and do like funny skits and gags and stuff, and make fun of pop culture and
of course like
Saturday Night Live
young
and the
teenagers. The idea of like doing it was more fun than actually knuckling under and coming up with jokes. So
we stole them.
A lot of our early stuff was either us shamefully ad-libbing and not being funny, or the stuff that was funny because we stole it from actual funny people.
So when that New Year's thing came out, Live at the Met thing came out, apparently I was basically after 86 and 87, I cribbed like most of it for the other two skits.
And I would say, and then this kind of gets to like why it's such a huge deal. I can sort of imagine like maybe younger generations, in the
wouldn't know who he was.
12 and under set would be aware of his name, but wouldn't have grown up with him.
Aladdin, the genie,
or been his influence. Yeah, even Aladdin is an older movie now.
It's a classic.
But for again our generation, Robin Williams was a force of nature. I mean, he was really influential. It was nobody really did comedy exactly the way he did. It was this sort of machine gun, rapid fire. It wasn't just the jokes. It was that a lot of them were legitimately clever and just sort of
like
off the cuff, satirically funny.
Like back in the 80s, everybody in that comedy special in 86 and then in 87, Dangerfield, they all did the joke about the sexual problems because of the Dr. Ruth thing.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, yeah, what are you talking about?
Uh-huh.
But it's like Williams, he was, he had this natural thing where he was like, no, you don't want this little bitty lady named Dr. Ruth. You want a big, enormous black lady named Dr. Ruth, because she'll tell you honestly that you can't turn butter with a toothpick, that kind of thing. So it's like because the idea that he's just spontaneous with that stuff. Johnny Carson years ago had done a Dr. Ruth sketch where he was dressed in drag and he was doing Dr. Ruth, and he just wasn't there. He wasn't on model. It was completely not funny.
He wasn't particularly good at actually imitating.
He was literally with his own normal voice going, "I'm Dr. Ruth Westheimer. Hello, you are on the air."
Yeah, of course. Now Carson and Dangerfield and a lot of those guys were. They were much more old school than Williams. They came from more
Dangerfield
of a pure,
at least tried to do with voice,
vaudeville. Well, not pure vaudeville. They're not from the 20s, but they were sort of influenced by the Borscht Belt and the vaudeville school. Whereas Williams kind of came out of nowhere in the 70s, and he was already just this sort of bundle of
he was
intense,
a Juilliard kid.
Yeah, he was a classically trained actor.
Well, a lot of the primetime players from Saturday Night Live came from there, so.
But
Juilliard school, yes.
But yeah, what Williams was doing was a little different. I mean, you could see the sort of old school influence, but he was kind of spinning it in a newer direction. And all through the '80s, comedy kind of went through this renaissance of, getting away from the old school, boom, setup and delivery thing, and being more strange and surreal.
Steve Martin was very good at that.
Yeah, Steve Martin was another one who.
But later on, ended up in bad movies
still
too.
around, but
oh yeah, he's still around.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. When you segue into a movie career, especially
Eddie
when you're
Murphy,
doing comedies, inevitably there's
ones.
going to be some lemons. So it's a lot of times it's not really the performer's fault. It's just the project. Well, every comedian in the '80s was.
So was Williams. He's all like. Ah.
Yeah, and Williams was very upfront about it. Especially in later years, he would talk about it, just like I was doing mountains of cocaine. That's why I'm so manic.
That's why he was on. He was on his last interview on Jon Stewart.
Oh yeah.
He was all talking about. Yeah, I've been sober now for a while.
Yeah, but he always struggled.
He said,
if it wasn't like drugs, or drinking or what have you, he was always talking about the intense struggle to not go back and fall off the wagon.
Yeah, he fell off the wagon.
When you're an addictive personality. And I remember I was just reading the other day the Bob Zmuda, who was Andy Kaufman's co-writer, but I guess he also worked with Williams, and they knew each other. They were friends for decades. And
Andy Kaufman, Man on the Moon.
Yeah,
that was actually a pretty good movie.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Huh. But he I guess he was buddies with Williams, and he had this sort of telling comment where he said that if you had a crowd, if there was more than 2 people in the room, Williams just became a comedian. He was always on. He couldn't not be funny. If he had an audience, he would just be in super clown mode. But if he was one-on-one, he would get really uncomfortable and have no social skills and get really shy and not know how to talk, even to somebody he'd been friends with for 30 years. And that is actually a very telling insight into why he was probably as funny as he was. Is there was almost kind of a desperation to his clowning.
Or maybe he was just able to. Maybe he developed the clowning persona, not in a schizoid way, but maybe he developed it in a.
No, he wasn't mentally ill necessarily.
No, it was just like maybe he. But maybe in order to cope with the world around him, he put on the clown persona to fit in with everybody around there, and he felt better in a crowd with a bunch of people, whereas it made him feel better, and otherwise he was not.
And you can just picture, somebody who's naturally very shy and kind of awkward around people, to be able to, put on a persona. One, it's a layer of protection between you and them, because if they don't laugh at your jokes, they're not really not laughing at you, they're just not laughing at the persona, but it's not really you, so it doesn't matter, it doesn't hurt you. But the double-edged sword of that is that if everybody loves your persona, you feel isolated from your own success, and you feel like, they don't really love me, they just love this person they think I am, but that's not really me. And I think that was clearly one of the issues that Williams was facing. I think for most of his career was the reason that he was so desperate to make everybody laugh was probably because he deep down was really shy and had no idea how to deal with people. You know, the notion that they're just naturally, no, I'm just naturally a clown. I'm perfectly well-adjusted and happy. I'm telling you what, that's going to be a very unfunny comedian. Bob Happy Guy, who is just like, hey, how about those kids? Yep, my 2.5 are off to the church. Ba-dum-bum. That's not going to be funny. I've always kind of had this pet theory, at least it's my personal taste, that the funnier comedians usually are the darker ones. But maybe that's just me.
Maybe we're just darker then.
Maybe.
That when you used to watch Saturday Night Live, SNL, back in the 80s, it was a completely different animal. You watch some of those first seasons, and they were actually clever, well-written jokes.
And when was the last time
clever,
SNL
well-written
was that?
people. And they were naturally funny people, even when they were baked out of their minds. It was still funny. Belushi, the original Belushi.
Well, they had a legendary cast to start with, too.
I know these. I know that as opposed to just be like a modern comedy where everything is just like, ooh, let's be gross and have poopy in our.
Well, that was the '80s. There was a lot of. I mean, there were some brilliant comedians in the '80s, but there was some crap comedy out there. I mean, they say, and there's always, well, like I was saying, in the '80s there was some shit comedy out there. It's terrible stuff. But there was also the Robin Williamses and the Steve Martins making movies that are today considered classics.
Okay, what is some of Robin Williams' 80s movies? I know he did a lot more comedy sketches than
he was
movies.
He kind of focused more on comedy,
TV.
I suppose, in the 80s, but he did do some dramas. A World According to Garp was one of his first. And that was a strange one because it starts off as a comedy,
and ends up
and then it careens into tragedy
drama,
like halfway through.
Like it's literally a manic depressive movie.
Yeah,
literally.
I guess that is the way the book that it was based on. I never read it, but
yeah.
Actually, no. One of his earliest movies, and it's one that a lot of people hated, and it was considered a flop, even though it did actually make money. Was Popeye, the live-action movie. Which he even spoke sort of disparagingly about, like, in later years, as like that movie he had to do because he was, trying to get his foot in the door. But I actually really enjoy that movie. It's not a masterpiece.
How old were you when that came out?
I must have been like 6. I think it was 6.
Oh man, well, I was a little older than that.
But I didn't get to see it in the theater. Actually, I saw it on home video because that was like the boom of the home video days.
I saw it in the theater.
But the thing about that movie that I love is that it's not really an adaptation of the cartoon. It's an adaptation of the original Thimble Theater comics. So there's all these side characters that were never in the cartoon, but they're there in the movie. And Robin Williams, I think, is just pitch perfect. I mean, he nails the voice and. That clearly is doing a lot of improv.
But did you, at the time when you were 6 years old, know that he was imitating the comic books?
Oh, I had no idea.
But it was only later on when you watched it again.
But I knew what Popeye was, and
the show.
I knew that it was a live action Popeye, and that was good enough. And then when I got a little older and I had read some of the Thimble Theaters, I was like, oh, that's where Giesel and Ham Gravy and all these side characters come from. And I love that's where they took their inspiration from, rather than just making it, a straight-up cartoon for...
My father was old, so I knew about that.
Oh, yeah.
I was a little older, too.
But,
so, yeah, he was...
I mean, that would be an example of, like, I actually think he nailed the part, even though the movie was considered a flop and everybody hated it.
I don't own it, though. It's just weird.
I do.
It's one of his better ones.
But, yeah...
I do have Aladdin.
Yeah, and Aladdin was one of the ones
in the 90s. Later.
It was actually one of the first times that a celebrity had done voice acting in an animated movie. Before Williams, not that many had done it. Voice
James
acting.
Earl Jones did The Lion and The Lion King.
That was actually after.
It was after.
Oh, yeah. But that's why James Earl Jones was The Lion and The Lion King, was because prior to voicing the genie, voice acting was kind of this anonymous world of, like, nobody outside of the industry knew who these people were. And they cast Williams and just sort of turned him loose. And I guess he had only done the movie as a favor to somebody at Disney. And they just basically turned him loose in the booth. So if you watch Aladdin and if you like that movie, which you should, A big part of the reason it's a hit and a big part of the reason that character works is because that is Robin Williams. They just turned him loose in the recording booth and said, "You're a genie, go." And, you know, an example of why Robin Williams was, you know, as beloved and legendary
he was
as he
also
was.
the peddler in the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Actually, no, I guess he was
combination
just those two characters.
hooker and coffee maker. Also makes Julian fries.
Yeah, and I'm
Even
sure
though-
that was one of his ad-libs. The directors, as much as said, they just turned him loose. But yeah, so, like, again, to sort of bring it back around, when he died, for, you know, people our age, and again, I felt the same when Michael Jackson died, because he was another huge just sort of influence on, you know, pop culture and our childhood. It was just kind of like a little piece of our childhood. But, I mean, for me personally, it's like these little pieces of your world that are just sort of like a part of your formative years, and it's like they're not there anymore, and it's a really empty sort of feeling. For me.
Yes.
But yeah, so it was just a really shocking day. And you know, the tremendous outpouring of grief and you know, goodwill towards his legacy speaks to that.
Of Robin Williams.
Yeah, of Robin Williams.
No relation to the John Williams from the KTS, which ended up
And he is not the composer, movie composer.
not the composer either. He was the other John, and he was met this kid that I knew from high school or junior high. Met him again after high school in 1990. We were in college, and he said, "I haven't done anything with KTS in years. You can have it back." So KTS came back.
Not to bring politics into it too much, but it was one of those examples of like hyper partisanship that Rush Limbaugh, of all people, that like a couple days after Williams died, was trying to claim that the reason that he died was because he was a flaming lefty liberal, and that's why he killed himself. Because he was liberal, and that was it. He couldn't back that up. He was just, that's the mode that guy's
Liberal.
permanently in. It's just like, I stubbed my toe. Damn liberals! Arg! It's just like. And quite rightly got slapped down online for that. People just mocking the hell out of him. Which is just like, really, dude, just let the family grieve. Let the world grieve, you know. Don't try to make it be about you.
Well, that would be like telling Rush Limbaugh would stop breathing if he couldn't tell him to not be about you. He would just go, "Oh, what?" So lonely.
I kind of doubt it, but...
No, he goes into his vault and counts his money.
Exactly.
And he's like, I'm so
laughs all the
lonely."
way to the bank, probably.
Yeah.
But
Cytoplasm.
cytoplasm.
Yeah, Robin Williams knew how to do it, and Carson didn't. And yeah, they got Leno to replace him. And then now they got Fallon, who did a tribute to him, and he showed his original Johnny Carson clip where Robin Williams is just running all over the stage like, "Oh, I'm gonna go over to this camera. I'm gonna go over to this camera.
And he could
and this
hijack
camera.
a set like nobody's business.
And then he's all like, "Light me over here!" And it's like,
Of course, he was probably blitzed on mountains of coke at the time.
and Johnny Carson's like,
Yeah, and Carson was probably just thinking like, you know,
Wow.
I'm from vaudeville. What the hell are you doing?
and then it's like, and then Fallon did like a monologue shtick where he did a pretty good imitation of Robin Williams. He actually did a pretty funny thing there. And yeah, but Jon Stewart was actually on hiatus. They weren't doing any episodes.
Yeah, I don't
starting to
think
happen.
he's come back yet to comment on it.
Ooh, they're on hiatus on that station. But yeah, now the Fox people are obsessed about something else.
I'm sure.
So,
But yeah, we were
but,
going to talk about this last week when it was a little more current, but we
Ron
ran out of time. But
yeah,
but yeah, so we've kind of had a little time to process. He could work blue and be hilarious. But yeah, it's like anything else. The fart is just a tool in your toolbox. You know, you've still got to spin a joke out of it. So it's like, and that's the thing about somebody like Robin Williams, that he could take just about any subject known to man and make jokes out of it.
He even made a joke about diapers and baby poop.
Yeah.
It was pretty funny.
You know, it's
discover he's playing games.
testament to his comedy genius that he could make a poopy diaper gag actually funny.
He's discovered a new toy. Oh my god!
Oh, I just thought of one of his all-time classics. I can't believe we forgot Mrs. Doubtfire.
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Which is got some...
Fortunately, they're not now going to make another one out of it.
Yeah, they were talking about a sequel. And it's
maybe that's what did him in.
Probably
maybe he
just
read
as well. Well, I
like,
think he was on board. I think he actually wanted to do it.
He was like, oh.
But it was the daughter, actually, who had played the little girl in the movie, and she's quit acting completely. She was just like, nah, I don't want to be in Hollywood anymore. And they asked her, are you going to come out of retirement? And she's like, no, I want to be in another movie.
Oh, now he never tried to make global warming funny, although his last comedy concert was Weapons of Self-Destruction.
Oh, yeah.
Which might tell you something.
Which, again, he was talking about his personal demons, but making them funny, and I think that was also a way of coping with himself.
He took out the most of the Bush elements, because by the time the concert came out, it was already 2008, so he was always out of office.
Oh, yeah, and he said the whole reason was he wanted to make fun of Bush, and then by the time he got it done, it was too late. But
so, I only been here for 15 minutes.
No, I didn't see it, but supposedly this movie that he was in a few years back called World's Greatest Dad is really quite funny. A movie that was written and directed by Bob Goldthwait, Bobcat, if you remember in the 80s. And he had this kind of personality. Sort of this, and I guess he got tired of doing that because he segued into writing and directing. Apparently he's really good. And he made this really dark sort of sardonic comedy about... actually, I believe suicide was one of the themes.
Was that the one where the father guy goes ballistic and he runs around like blasting people?
No, that was his follow-up. I haven't seen that one either, but everybody said that was funny.
That one's messed up. I've heard about that.
Yeah, it's a...
That one disappeared after that guy went around shooting people in movie theaters.
I think it had already... It only played for like a week anyway.
But it wasn't even... It was a coincidence. They just took it out of theaters because...
But, so this World's Greatest Dad movie, I guess, was about a father whose son commits suicide. And, but,
you're so talented.
Illustrated that Williams was perfectly comfortable working with darker themes.
You're so talented. Aww.
Yeah.
The darker themes. Like this. Darker theme. Now if she breaks wind, it'll be hilarious. It's all about timing.
Exactly. Comedy is like 90% timing. Still gotta have an actual joke, though, or at least something resembling comedy. And what is comedy? Literally, it's just whatever the hell makes you laugh.
See, what other... I can't think of a slew of movies that he's done, really.
He actually wasn't that prolific.
Vietnam.
I mean, he made a lot of movies, but he kind of, especially in the last 10 years, he did a lot of art house stuff.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of him for years.
There were a bunch of comedies that he did that I just flat out didn't see because, frankly, they weren't to my taste. Like RV.
That wasn't that good.
I don't think he was in Wild Hogs, was he? Wasn't that Travolta? And he might as well. I mean, he did a bunch of movies kind of like that where, to me, they just sort of smacked of a lazy studio going, just get our usual suspects and, put them, on a moon base and turn them loose, and comedy will probably ensue.
So they still do shock comedy. They do still do comedy that doesn't make sense, that isn't clever anymore. And although movie 33 is a bad example, Williams was a classic guy from back in the day. He could make any joke funny, pretty much.
Yeah, and that was the
thing.
Like
early Carey and early Eddie Murphy.
Like his early stuff, like Moscow on the Hudson, where he was doing sort of a balance between comedy and this sort of sweet-natured poignancy that, again, in later years, I think he tended to oversell. Like Patch Adams is probably the one that I have the hardest time with, just because there's a scene in it where he's standing on a cliff edge praying to God to tell him whether it's a good idea to continue to heal the sick children dying of cancer with his funny clown nose. And a butterfly flutters over, touches his medical bag, then flutters over and touches his heart. And then flies up and he's going, oh, and he's like looking up at the sky and the music is swelling, and I was just kind of like, oh my God, movie, you're drowning me in treacle. You don't have to hit me this hard. I get it. Helping sick kids is good. I get it.
Well, you just don't like those kind of movies.
I don't mind them if they're done. You
probably shouldn't see Fault in Our Stars. I haven't seen that movie, but it's probably smarmy too.
He was.
He would like that joke. Yeah.
He probably would have chuckled at that. But yeah, he was a real force in the comedy world.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a while before there's another like him.
Yeah, he will be missed. I don't know that there will ever be another exactly like him.
Ooh, well, if they're going the way of those movies with all shock value, comedy's going to be completely different before too long.
Well, it's just mutating.
Saturday Night Live doesn't even make sense anymore. It's either political humor or something
Well, SNL hasn't been funny for like 20 years, frankly. But anyway, so we better wrap it up. So anyway, we probably covered the legacy
comedy
and the importance and the tragic loss.
No, you have to go buy some Robin Williams movies.
Actually, I've been meaning to watch Popeye. Maybe I'll get to it this weekend. Robin Williams, as described by two random people from the 80s.
And, of course, at the end of the Live at the Met, he goes, "Fuck it." Fuck it.